A federal court just ruled that some of the most common gun transport laws in America may be unconstitutional. And the wild part? The Department of Justice in multiple states are actually supporting the decision. Quick question before we continue. Are you subscribed? Because what I am about to walk you through could be the difference between legally transporting your firearm and accidentally catching a felony charge. Hit that subscribe button right now. I will be here when you get back. Okay, so let us talk about what is actually happening here and why this is such a big deal. Most gun owners think they know the rules for transporting a firearm. You unload it, you lock it up, you put it in the trunk, and you drive. Simple, right? Wrong. Because depending on which state you are driving through, those exact same steps could still get you arrested. That is the insane reality millions of Americans have been living with for decades. And a recent court decision is starting to crack that wall wide open. Here is what just happened. A federal court issued a ruling that directly challenges the patchwork of state transport restrictions that have made traveling with firearms a legal nightmare. Now, when I say patchwork, I mean it. Right now in this country, the rules for transporting a gun can change the moment you cross a state line. What is perfectly legal in Virginia might get you locked up in New Jersey. What works in Arizona falls apart the second you hit California. That inconsistency has trapped honest, law-abiding gun owners for years. People who had no idea they were doing anything wrong. Let me give you a real scenario to make this hit home. Imagine you are a gun owner in Pennsylvania. You legally own your firearm. You follow all the rules. One day you plan a road trip down to Florida. You pack your gun the way you always do, unloaded, in a case separate from the ammunition. You feel good because you read up on federal law, and you know the Firearm Owners Protection Act, which is also called FOPA, is supposed to protect you during interstate travel. But here's the thing. You stop for the night in New Jersey. Maybe you need gas, maybe you need a bathroom break, or maybe you just hit traffic and decide to rest at a hotel. The moment you do that, some states argue your federal protection disappears. And just like that, a responsible gun owner is now potentially facing serious criminal charges. That is not a hypothetical scare tactic. That is a situation that has actually happened to real people. Now, this is where the recent court ruling comes in. The court looked at these kinds of restrictions and asked a simple question. Do these transport laws hold up under the Second Amendment? And based on the Bruin decision from the Supreme Court back in 2022, the answer is looking more and more like no. The Bruin test, in simple terms, says that any gun law has to be consistent with the historical tradition of firearm regulation in America. In other words, if a law did not exist in some form back when the Constitution was written, it has a much harder time surviving in court today. Here is the part nobody's talking about. When courts apply that Bruin test to heavy transport restrictions, many of those restrictions cannot find historical backup. There is no long tradition in American history of states blocking people from moving their legally owned firearms from one place to another. That means these laws are vulnerable. And the court in this latest ruling said exactly that. But wait, there is something even more important here. It is not just the court saying this. The Department of Justice, which under normal circumstances is not exactly the gun owner's best friend, has weighed in on the side of striking down certain transport restrictions. And several states have filed briefs supporting the ruling too. That is huge. That is not just a judge in one courtroom having an opinion. That is a signal that the legal foundation for these restrictive transport laws is crumbling from multiple directions at once. If you are finding this helpful so far, I want you to imagine what you are going to learn in my next video. I'm covering the 5 specific words that can protect you when a police officer asks if you are carrying a firearm. You do not want to miss that one. Hit subscribe right now so it shows up in your feed the moment it drops. Okay, let us keep going. Because now we need to talk about what this ruling actually means for you on a practical level. First thing to understand is that this does not immediately wipe out every transport law in every state. Courts do not work that way. One ruling does not automatically change the law everywhere overnight. What it does is set a precedent. And that precedent is going to be used as a hammer in courtrooms across the country to chip away at these restrictions one by one. Second, the states that have been most aggressive about transport restrictions are already feeling the pressure. States like New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Massachusetts, and California have built up layers of rules around how you can move a firearm. Now, those layers are being challenged using the same legal framework that this ruling reinforces. Defense attorneys are going to start citing this decision. Cases that were previously slam dunks for prosecutors are now going to get much more complicated. Third, and this is the part that really matters to everyday gun owners, the ruling puts more power in your hands to assert your rights during a traffic stop or a police encounter involving transport. Now, quick legal note here. This is educational information, not legal advice. Always consult a licensed attorney for your specific situation because every state is different and every case has its own facts. Do not use this video as a substitute for actual legal counsel. Got it? Good. Moving on. Here is what most people get wrong about the Firearm Owners Protection Act that I mentioned earlier. Most gun owners hear about FOPA and think they're fully protected anytime they drive through a state with tough gun laws. But FOPA has conditions. Your firearm has to be unloaded. It has to be in a locked container that is not the glove compartment or the center console. The ammunition has to be stored separately. And you have to be traveling through the state, not stopping for an extended period. The law uses the word traveling, and states have argued over what counts as a legal stop versus a stay. This is where people get caught. They think they are covered, they make a stop, and suddenly they are in legal gray territory. The new court ruling helps clarify that states cannot pile on extra requirements that go beyond what the Constitution allows. That is a big shift. It is saying that just because a state wants to make transport harder does not mean they have the power to do it. Now, this is where it gets interesting. There are multiple cases working their way through different federal courts right now that deal with similar issues. This ruling is not standing alone. It is part of a growing wave of legal challenges to transport restrictions that are being fueled by the Bruin decision. Legal experts who follow Second Amendment cases closely are saying we could be looking at a major shift in how interstate gun transport works within the next 2 to 3 years. Some are saying even sooner, depending on how fast these cases move through the courts. Hey, a quick second here. 73% of people watching right now are not subscribed to this channel. Do not be part of that group. Join the tens of thousands of gun owners who get these legal updates first, straight to their feed, before they ever hit the mainstream news. Click subscribe right now and you will always be ahead of the curve. Now, let us talk about something that has been happening behind the scenes that most people have completely missed. Some of the states that filed briefs supporting this ruling did so because they actually want clarity. Even some states with stricter gun laws have acknowledged that the current patchwork system creates confusion and enforcement problems. Nobody, not even law enforcement, benefits from a system where the rules change every few miles, and nobody agrees on what the law actually means. This is significant because it shows that the push to end confusing transport restrictions is not just coming from gun rights advocates. It is coming from people inside the system who have watched the confusion play out in real courtrooms with real consequences for real people. When you have prosecutors, defense attorneys, law enforcement officers, and now even the Department of Justice all agreeing that the current system does not make sense, that is when things actually start to change. Let me break this down for you in simple terms. What the court is essentially saying is this. You have a constitutional right to own a firearm. That right does not vanish the moment you put your gun in your car. The government can put reasonable rules around how you transport it for safety reasons. But those rules have to be reasonable, they have to be consistent with history, and they cannot be so burdensome that they effectively take away your right to transport your legal firearm at all. That is the line. And the court is saying some states have crossed it. Here is what you should do with this information right now. Number 1, if you travel between states with a firearm, learn FOPA inside and out. Know the exact requirements. Unloaded, locked case, ammo separate, direct travel. Write it down if you have to. Number 2, know the specific laws of every state you are driving through or stopping in. Yes, even with this ruling in play, state laws are still in effect until a court specifically strikes them down. Do not assume you're covered just because a court challenged a law in another state. Number 3, if you are ever stopped by law enforcement while transporting a firearm, be calm, be honest, and know your rights. Do not volunteer information you are not legally required to share, but do not lie either. And number 4, if you ever find yourself in a situation where you are charged with a transport violation, get a Second Amendment attorney immediately. Do not try to navigate that alone. This information could become even more critical before the end of next year as more of these cases reach their final decisions. Subscribe right now because my next video is going to walk you through exactly what gun owners need to do before these court decisions become finalized and what the deadlines look like. You need to see that video. Hit subscribe so you do not miss it. All right, here's the big takeaway from everything we covered today. A federal court has ruled that many common gun transport restrictions do not hold up under the Constitution, and both the Department of Justice and several states are backing that position. This does not mean every transport law disappears overnight, but it does mean the legal tide is turning in favor of gun owners who want to travel freely with their legally owned firearms. The Bruin framework is being used effectively to challenge laws that have trapped innocent people for years, and that trend is only going to accelerate. If you made it this far, I want you to do one thing before you close this video. Subscribe to the channel. Not just because it supports the work I put into researching these topics, but because this is genuinely a time when knowing the law before something happens to you is the difference between your freedom and your future. Hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, And share this video with every gun owner you know, because this affects all of us. Remember, this video is for educational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. Gun laws vary by state and can change quickly. Always consult a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction before making any decisions based on this content. Stay safe, stay legal, and I will see you in the next one.